She was the most powerful woman in the room, and the most untouchable. He was the man paid to protect her, the one person who never tried to impress her. One quiet compliment at a gala full of cameras and ambition cracked something open between them that neither of them knew how to close. But when a rival executive decided to burn them both to the ground, they would learn that the real danger wasn't the scandal. It was how much they had already come to need each other. If this story already has you hooked, hit that like button right now and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Follow along to the very end, because this one doesn't go where you think it will. The gala was the kind of event that reminded Ethan Holloway exactly why he hated galas. He stood near the east entrance of the Meridian Grand Ballroom, shoulders squared, earpiece in, watching 300 people pretend to care about a charity they'd forget by morning. Crystal chandeliers threw light across silk gowns and tailored suits. Servers moved through the crowd with trays of champagne that cost more per bottle than Ethan made in a day. A jazz quartet worked through something slow and expensive in the far corner. The whole room smelled like money and cologne and a kind of quiet desperation that he'd learned to recognize over years of working security. The particular tension of people trying very hard to look like they belonged. Ethan belonged. He just didn't want to be there. He checked his watch. 8:47. Lily's bedtime was 9, and he'd already missed it 3 times this week. His sister was at the apartment, which meant Lily was fine, which meant the guilt Ethan was carrying around in his chest right now was entirely self-inflicted and completely useless. He knew that. It didn't help. His radio crackled. "Principal is 3 minutes out." "Copy," he said. He straightened his jacket, adjusted his earpiece, and moved toward the main entrance. This was the job. Victoria Sterling was arriving, which meant Ethan's entire evening narrowed to a single point. Keep her safe, keep her schedule moving, keep the evening from going sideways in any of the 40 different ways it could go sideways when you put a CEO worth $4 billion in a room full of people who wanted something from her. He'd been head of security for Sterling Technologies for 2 years. In that time, he'd learned a few things about Victoria Sterling that the press didn't print. She drank her coffee too hot and too fast, which meant she'd burned her tongue at least a dozen times that he'd witnessed and never once complained about. She always read the room within 30 seconds of entering it, not in the obvious way that politicians did, working the crowd, but quietly, almost clinically, the way a chess player assesses a board. She was harder on herself than she was on anyone who worked for her, and she had a habit, when she was genuinely stressed, of pressing her thumb against her index finger under the table, a small, private tell that he'd noticed by accident one afternoon during a board meeting and had never forgotten. She was also, he was entirely aware, one of the most attractive women he'd ever been in close proximity to. He was also entirely aware that this was a thought he was not permitted to have, and he was generally successful at not having it. Generally. The car pulled up. The door opened. Ethan saw the gown first, midnight blue, the kind of blue that looked almost black in certain light, and then caught the chandelier at a different angle and turned into something that had no practical name. It moved the way expensive fabric moved, with a quiet authority, and it fit Victoria the way clothes only fit people who'd been measured for them by someone who actually knew what they were doing. Her dark hair was up. A single earring caught the light on one side. Just one, which was somehow more striking than 2 would have been. She stepped out of the car, assessed the entrance in about 4 seconds, and looked directly at Ethan. "Holloway. Ms. Sterling." He fell into step beside her. Approximately 300 guests, board members, donors, pressed to the left side of the room. They've been told cameras stay in the designated areas, but Hargrove from Channel 7 is here, and he doesn't respect designated areas. Your scheduled remarks are at 9:15. There's a table issue. Caldwell Industries got seated 2 tables closer to the front than they were supposed to be, and Marcus Reeves from your acquisitions team is already aware and managing it. Reeves shouldn't have to manage it. That's a venue logistics failure. She said it without heat, just noting a fact. Agreed. I'll follow up with event coordination afterward. Fine. She paused just inside the entrance, doing that thing she always did, reading the room, mapping the evening, calculating. Then she exhaled slowly through her nose. Tell me something honest, Ethan. He was already scanning the crowd and noted the slight shift she'd made, first name instead of last, which she did occasionally in moments when the professional armor got a little heavier than usual. About what? About whether this evening is going to be as exhausting as I think it is. He considered lying. He was good at lying, Ace. It was part of the job sometimes, the small, comfortable untruths that kept things moving smoothly. But she'd asked him to be honest, and he'd learned early that Victoria Sterling didn't actually want to be managed. She wanted to be told the truth and then be left to handle it herself. There are 4 people in that room who are going to try to corner you about the Meridian acquisition before you reach the bar, he said. 2 board members who are unhappy about Q3 projections and plan to use a social setting to express that unhappiness because they think you're less likely to shut them down here than in a meeting. 1 journalist who got credentialed as a guest and is absolutely going to ask you about the Hollander lawsuit. And Gerald Whitmore, who doesn't want anything specific, he just enjoys making you uncomfortable. Victoria was quiet for a moment. So yes, Ethan said. Exhausting. Something flickered in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something adjacent to one. Thank you for the advance notice. That's what you pay me for. They moved into the ballroom together, and Ethan watched the room shift almost imperceptibly as Victoria Sterling walked into it. It wasn't the obvious thing, not the heads turning and the conversations pausing, though those happened too. It was something subtler. The way the temperature of the room seemed to change slightly, the way people who had been moving through the space with easy confidence straightened a little without realizing they were doing it. Victoria had that effect. She didn't try to. It was just the specific gravity of someone who had earned their authority the hard way and wore it without needing to announce it. Ethan positioned himself 3 feet to her left and 2 steps back, close enough to intervene quickly, far enough to give her space to work the room without a shadow hanging over every conversation. He watched the crowd while she greeted people, shook hands, accepted compliments with a smile that was professional and warm, and revealed absolutely nothing. He noticed Gerald Whitmore starting to angle toward her from across the room and considered intercepting him, then decided against it. Victoria was perfectly capable of handling Whitmore. She always had been. His job was to be there if it went somewhere it shouldn't, not to run interference on every awkward social interaction. His phone buzzed. He checked it under his arm, quick enough that no one would see. Lily wants to know if you can call before she goes to sleep. Sandra. He typed back, "Tell her I'll try. 20 minutes." He pocketed the phone, focused back on the room. Victoria had extracted herself from Whitmore in under 2 minutes, which was actually faster than average, and was now in conversation with a group of donors near the bar. Ethan moved in a slow arc, keeping her in his sightline, checking exits, checking faces. This was the part of the job that looked like nothing from the outside. The endless low-level vigilance, the constant reading of body language and proximity and intention. Most evenings, it amounted to nothing. That was the point. His job was to make sure nothing happened, and nothing was a very underrated outcome. He was on his second pass of the room when he saw it. A man near the service corridor, late 40s, expensive suit, but the shoes were wrong. They were the right brand, but they had a particular kind of wear that said they'd been bought for this occasion rather than lived in. He had a lanyard, but he was holding it folded so the badge faced inward, which was either social awkwardness or deliberate concealment. He was watching Victoria with the specific, patient attention of someone who was waiting rather than mingling. Ethan changed course. He was halfway across the room when his earpiece crackled. "Holloway, we've got a situation at the East Catering entrance." "What kind of situation?" "Delivery personnel who don't match the catering manifest. 2 individuals." "Hold them. I'm on my way." He glanced back at the suspicious figure near the corridor, still watching Victoria, not moving yet. He touched his radio. "Chen, eyes on the subject in the navy suit, northeast quadrant, near the Edgewater Group table. Don't approach, just maintain visual." "Got him," Chen confirmed. Ethan moved through the crowd efficiently, cutting a line toward the east entrance without making it look like he was moving fast. The thing about security work that most people didn't understand was that visible urgency was itself a liability. You ran toward a fire and everyone panicked. You walked with purpose and people assumed you were handling something routine because you were. The catering situation turned out to be 2 temporary staff who had the right uniforms but incorrect credentialing paperwork. A clerical error from the staffing agency, confirmed within 4 minutes with a phone call. Ethan cleared them, documented the discrepancy, and returned to the main room. He found his way back to Victoria's orbit and resumed his position. She was in conversation with a board member now, a man named Douglas Ashford, 70 years old, silver-haired, one of the company's original investors, and someone Victoria had described to Ethan once with exactly 3 words: exhausting but harmless. The man near the corridor had moved. He was now closer to the main floor, champagne in hand, more relaxed, or performing relaxation more convincingly. Ethan logged him as a lower priority concern, probable journalist, would approach when the moment seemed right, standard behavior. The evening moved forward the way these evenings always did, in slow circular waves of conversation and positioning and careful social mathematics. Ethan tracked all of it from the edge, watching the room, watching Victoria, watching the space between people and what they wanted from each other. At 9:15, Victoria delivered her remarks. She was good at this. She was good at most things, but she was specifically good at speaking, not in the trained, polished way of people who had media coaches, though she probably had one of those too. She was good at it because she said things she actually meant, in language that was direct without being blunt, and she didn't perform conviction. She just had it. The remarks were about the Sterling Foundation's education initiatives, new scholarship programs, partnerships with 3 Chicago public school districts, a mentorship pipeline that the foundation had been quietly building for 2 years. The room gave her the right applause in the right places. She thanked the right people and didn't thank the ones who didn't deserve it, which Ethan had always privately respected. Afterward, as the applause faded and the program transitioned to the live auction portion of the evening, Victoria moved back toward the edge of the room. Ethan fell in beside her. "How'd I do?" she asked, keeping her voice low. "You spent 45 seconds longer on the scholarship section than your prepared remarks indicated." "That wasn't what I asked," he paused. "You meant it. People could tell." She was quiet for a moment. "Ashford is going to ask me about the Hollander lawsuit in approximately 4 minutes. I know, I can intercept him." "Don't." She picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. "I'd rather just answer it. He's going to try to make you defend a settlement decision in a social setting. He's 70 years old and he's been trying to catch me off guard since the day I took this job." There was no bitterness in it, just a kind of flat, tired resignation. At some point, I stopped expecting anything different. It was that, not the remark itself, but the exhaustion underneath it, the specific weariness of someone who had spent years being the youngest person in every room and the only woman at most tables, and had made peace with that in a way that hadn't actually made it lighter. It was that which made Ethan say what he said next. They were passing through a slightly less crowded section of the floor, making their way toward the auction display area, and he had been about to say something routine about their route. Instead, what came out was, "Your dress looks incredible tonight." He said it quietly, practically under his breath. He wasn't entirely sure why he said it. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't strategic, it was just the truth of the moment. The specific truth of standing next to a woman who had been carrying an entire room on her shoulders for 2 hours and hadn't flinched once. Victoria stopped, just for a second. She turned her head and looked at him directly, the way she rarely looked at people. Not the professional assessment she used on board members or the careful warmth she offered donors, but something else, something unguarded. "You don't mean the dress," she said. The room kept moving around them. 300 people in animated, self-important conversation. The jazz quartet had shifted to something with a little more pace. Someone laughed too loudly across the floor, the way people did when the champagne started hitting. None of it existed for about 4 seconds in Ethan's immediate awareness. He held her gaze. "No," he said. "I don't." Something crossed Victoria Sterling's face that he had never seen there before, and then she looked away. She set her shoulders. The armor went back up, smooth and immediate, and she was the CEO again, composed, unreadable, moving forward. But her hand, at her side, pressed her thumb once against her index finger, and Ethan had been paying attention long enough to know what that meant. He called Lily at 9:40. She answered on the second ring, her voice thick with the particular drowsiness of a child who had been fighting sleep for at least an hour. "Daddy?" "Hey, Bug." He'd stepped outside to the service corridor, back against the wall, voice low. "You're supposed to be asleep." "I was waiting." "Sandra said you were already in bed." "I was in bed. I wasn't asleep." "Those are different things." She said it with the particular certainty of an 8-year-old who had recently discovered that being technically correct was a form of victory. Ethan pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose and smiled despite himself. "You're right. They are different things. Did you eat dinner?" "I had something." "What?" He hadn't, actually. He'd had 2 cups of coffee and half a protein bar in the car on the way over. "A thing. It doesn't matter. How was school?" "We did a project about ecosystems." A pause. "Mine was about tide pools. Were tide pools your choice or the teacher's?" "Mine. Mrs. Okafor said I could pick any ecosystem, and I picked tide pools because they have hermit crabs and sea anemones, and also the whole thing about how they're like their own little world that only exists at certain times of the day, and then the ocean covers it up and it's gone. I thought that was cool." Ethan leaned his head back against the wall. His daughter, who was 8 years old and had more genuine curiosity about the world than most of the adults currently drinking champagne 30 feet away, was explaining tide pools to him in a service corridor, and this was, without question, the best part of his evening. "That is cool," he said. "Did you know that sea stars can regenerate their arms? Like if they lose one, it just grows back." "I did not know that. I'm putting it in my project." Another pause. "Are you almost done?" "Little while longer, Bug. I'll be home before midnight." "That's very late." "I know. I'm sorry." She was quiet for a moment with the specific quality of a child who was deciding whether to say something. Then, "Is your boss nice?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask?" "You work for her a lot. Like a lot. So I wondered if she was nice." Ethan thought about Victoria Sterling standing at a podium talking about scholarships for public school students with something real in her voice. He thought about her telling him 3 weeks ago to go home when Lily had a fever, before he'd even figured out how to ask. He thought about her just now, looking at him with that unguarded expression before the armor slid back into place. "She's complicated," he said. "But yeah, she's nice." "Okay." Lily seemed to accept this with the philosophical ease of a child who did not overthink things. "Daddy?" "Yeah. The sea star thing works for people too, I think. Like when something bad happens and it kind of takes a piece of you. I think you can grow it back." He didn't say anything for a second. He was 32 years old and his 8-year-old daughter had just said something that hit him in a part of his chest. He kept careful walls around, and he wasn't entirely sure what to do with that. "Go to sleep, Lily." "I love you." "I love you too. Lock the door of your heart until morning." It was a thing he'd been saying to her since she was 4, back when she had started asking complicated questions about the dark, and whether bad things could get in while she was sleeping, and he'd invented it on the spot. A small ritual, lock the door of your heart, keep the good things in and the hard things out until you were ready for them in the daylight. She still asked for it every night, even now that she was 8 and had stopped being afraid of the dark, and had replaced that fear with 100 other questions he was less equipped to answer. He heard her settle into her pillow. He stood in the service corridor for another 30 seconds after he hung up, just breathing. Then he straightened his jacket, touched his earpiece, and went back to work. The rest of the evening passed without incident. The suspicious figure near the service corridor turned out to be a freelance journalist who had gotten himself credentialed through a donor organization and was attempting to ambush Victoria about the Hollander settlement. Ethan had identified the approach in time to position himself at her elbow and make it clear that this was not a productive avenue, and the journalist had retreated with the particular disappointment of someone who had planned a gotcha for 2 weeks and watched it fall apart in 30 seconds. Douglas Ashford had, as predicted, attempted the lawsuit conversation. Victoria had handled it in 4 sentences, changed the subject without seeming to change it, and left him nodding thoughtfully about something entirely different. Ethan had watched this with genuine admiration and said nothing about it afterward because commenting on her social maneuvering would have been condescending, and one of the things he had learned about Victoria Sterling was that she noticed condescension with extraordinary precision and remembered it. The auction raised $2.3 million for the foundation's education programs. Victoria shook the appropriate hands, thanked the appropriate people, and began making her exit moves around 10:40. The careful, gradual withdrawal of someone who knew how to leave a room without the room noticing for 15 minutes. In the car, on the way to her building, they didn't talk much. This wasn't unusual. The post-event car ride was generally a decompression period, and Ethan had learned to give her space in it rather than filling it with debrief. He sat in the front passenger seat. She sat in the back. He watched the city move past the windows. Chicago at 11 p.m., still lit up and alive, the lakefront dark to the east. He was thinking about Lily and tide pools and sea stars growing back the pieces they'd lost. "Thank you," Victoria said. He turned slightly. "For what specifically?" "For the journalist? For Ashford? For the thing at 9:15? A brief pause. "For the thing you said about the dress?" He faced forward again. In the dark of the car, with the city lights moving across the windshield, his reflection was barely there. "You don't need to thank me for any of that." "I'm aware." Another pause. "I'm doing it anyway." He thought about saying something, about the armor she wore and what he'd seen underneath it tonight, about the particular loneliness of being the most powerful person in every room and having no one in any of those rooms who actually knew you, about his daughter, asleep in their apartment, who had somehow figured out at 8 years old that broken things could heal. He thought about all of that. He said, "Get some sleep, Ms. Sterling." She made a small sound that might have been a laugh. "Good night, Ethan." The car moved through the city. He was very careful, on the drive back to his own apartment, not to think about how his name had sounded in her voice. He was mostly unsuccessful. The Monday after the gala, everything went back to normal. This was the thing about moments. They existed and then they were over. And the world had a tremendous capacity for returning to its ordinary shape immediately after something significant had passed through it. Ethan was at his desk by 7:15. Security rotation review, access log audit, a personnel issue with one of the overnight staff that needed to be addressed before the week got further along. His office was on the 3rd floor of Sterling Technologies' Chicago headquarters, a glass and steel building on Michigan Avenue that Victoria had commissioned 4 years ago and that still occasionally appeared in architectural publications. His office was small and functional, a desk and 2 monitors and a wall of windows that looked out onto a secondary courtyard rather than the street, which he preferred. Less traffic, less noise. He was halfway through the access log when his door opened without a knock. He knew before he looked up that it wasn't Victoria. She always knocked, which was one of the things about her that surprised people who expected the opposite. The person who opened his door without knocking was Marcus Reeves, head of acquisitions, 38 years old, a man with the specific confidence of someone who had never once doubted that his presence was welcome in any room he chose to enter. "Holloway." Reeves dropped into the chair across from Ethan's desk as though he'd been invited. "Good weekend?" "Fine." Ethan kept his eyes on the monitor. "Was there something you needed?" "Heard you had an interesting evening at the gala." Ethan looked up. Reeves was studying his nails with casual attention that was not, in fact, casual at all. "The gala was standard," Ethan said. "Sure." Reeves glanced up. "Couple people mentioned you and Sterling seemed—" He paused, letting the pause do work. "Close." "I'm head of security. My job involves being in close proximity to the CEO at corporate events. That's not a novel observation." Right. Reeves smiled. It was a practice smile, the kind that men who had spent a long time in corporate environments developed. Warm on the surface, evaluative underneath. Just making conversation. "You need something from me, Marcus. I'm happy to help. Otherwise, I've got a full morning." Reeves stood unhurried, the way people stood when they wanted it understood that they were leaving by choice rather than by dismissal. "No, I'm good. Just checking in." He moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "How's the kid? Lily, right?" Ethan went still, just for a fraction of a second. "She's great," he said. His voice was level. "Good. Good to hear." Reeves left. Ethan sat for a moment looking at the door, then he turned back to his monitor. The access log showed nothing unusual, everything in order, everything exactly as it should be. He filed the conversation away in a part of his mind where he kept things that didn't mean anything yet, but might mean something later. This was a security instinct, the recognition of a data point before you knew what data set it belonged to. He finished the log and moved on to the personnel issue. 3 floors up, behind glass walls and closed doors, Victoria Sterling was already deep in her first meeting of the week, surrounded by people who wanted things from her, making decisions that would ripple out through thousands of lives, carrying all of it with the particular steadiness of someone who had never had anyone to hand any of it to. He didn't think about this. He was very disciplined about not thinking about it. He was, again, mostly unsuccessful. 2 weeks after the gala, Ethan discovered the scholarship. It happened accidentally, the way things that change the direction of your life often do, not through any particular revelation or confrontation, but through a small, ordinary moment that turned out not to be ordinary at all. Lily came home from school with a permission slip for a weekend program, a STEM enrichment initiative being offered through her school for 4th and 5th graders. It was the kind of program that cost money her school district didn't have, the kind that appeared occasionally in better-funded districts and rarely in theirs. He'd signed the slip without thinking much about it, noted that it said fully funded through the Sterling Foundation, and moved on. He might have left it there, except that 3 days later, at a routine briefing with the Foundation's program liaison, he heard the liaison mention the school by name, Eastview Elementary Bridgeport, as one of 3 schools in the current pilot cohort of a new partnership initiative. The briefing was about something else entirely. He was there in a security capacity, running standard protocol for a Foundation board meeting. He shouldn't have been paying attention to program details. He paid attention to program details. After the meeting, he pulled up the Sterling Foundation's public grant database. It was publicly accessible, nothing irregular about looking at it, and he found Eastview Elementary listed as a grant recipient. Initial award, 14 months ago. Amount, significant. Scope, educational programming, STEM enrichment, teacher training subsidies. 14 months ago was when Lily had transferred to Eastview after the rezoning that had made their apartment's original district assignment untenable. It was right around when he'd mentioned to a colleague, a casual mention, the kind you don't think twice about, that the school was great but underfunded, that Lily had gotten lucky with her teacher, but the resource gap was visible. That colleague was part of the security team that sometimes overlapped with Victoria's personal staff schedule. That colleague had a habit of talking. Ethan sat with this for 2 days. He ran it back and forth in his mind, looking for the coincidence, the alternative explanation, the simpler reading. There wasn't one. On the 3rd day, he knocked on Victoria's office door at 4:30 in the afternoon, which was later than her public schedule indicated, but right around the time when the stream of meetings finally broke, and she had 40 minutes before her next obligation. He knew her schedule. That was part of the job. She called him in. She was at her desk, jacket off, reading something on a tablet with the focused expression she wore when she was actually concentrating, rather than performing concentration. She set the tablet down when she saw him. "Holloway, this isn't on my calendar." "No." He came in, closed the door, and stood in front of her desk. He didn't sit. "I need to ask you something directly." She read his face and something shifted in hers. Not alarm exactly, but attention. "All right. The Sterling Foundation grant to Eastview Elementary. In Bridgeport. A beat. A small one. But he was watching for it, and it was there." "What about it?" Her voice was even. 14 months ago. 2 months after I mentioned to Davis that Lily had transferred there and the school was underfunded. Victoria said nothing. "I'm not accusing you of anything," Ethan said carefully. "I just want to know if it's a coincidence." She looked at him for a long moment. Something was happening in her expression that he couldn't fully read, which was unusual. He was generally good at reading people, and he was better than good at reading her. But this was something that didn't have a clean name, something layered. "Does it matter?" she asked finally. "Yes." "Why?" "The school is better funded now. The students benefit. The teachers benefit. Your daughter benefits." She picked up her pen, set it down. "What part of that outcome requires examination?" The part where you did something significant for someone close to me without telling them. I did something significant for a school that needed funding. That's what the foundation does. Victoria. He used her name. He did it deliberately because the first name address was a shift in register that she would recognize, and because they were past the point where last names were doing anything useful. She was quiet. I know it's not just the school, he said. I know you looked into it specifically because of Lily. She turned her chair slightly, facing the window. Chicago's skyline filled the glass, late afternoon light going amber across the buildings. You have good instincts. I've been told. Another pause. When she turned back, something about her face was different. Not more open exactly, but more honest. The CEO face had slipped, not all the way, but enough. I heard you tell Davis about the transfer, she said, about the resource gap. You weren't complaining. You were just noting it the way you note facts. But the school was in our target demographic for the pilot program, and She stopped. Started again. I looked into it. The need was real. The grant was merit-based. I believe all of that. Then why are you here? Because I want to know why you didn't tell me. She pressed her thumb against her index finger under the desk. He saw it happen. She didn't know he could see it. Because it wasn't about telling you, she said quietly. It wasn't a favor I was doing for you. It was another stop. He waited. I didn't want you to think I was trying to make you feel indebted, or that I was using your daughter as a way to... She stopped again, and for the first time in the 2 years he had worked for her, Victoria Sterling looked genuinely uncertain about how to finish a sentence. As a way to what? He asked. The silence went on long enough that the amber light in the windows shifted, and the office got slightly darker, and neither of them reached for the lamp. I just wanted to help, she said finally. It came out stripped of everything. No framing, no qualification, no professional distance. Just the plain fact of it. I knew you were managing it alone. I knew you never asked for anything from anyone. I wanted to do something that would make it a pause. Easier, just a little, without you having to know about it. Ethan stood in front of her desk and felt something complicated and inconvenient happen in his chest. He'd spent 2 years maintaining a careful, professional distance from this woman. He'd done it because she was his employer and he was her employee, and because he had an 8-year-old daughter who had already lost one parent and did not need to watch her father make impractical decisions. He'd done it because he was good at his job, and being good at his job meant keeping certain lines intact. He was looking at those lines now, and they seemed, suddenly, very thin. That was not a small thing to do, he said. No. Her voice was quiet. I know. You could have told me. I know. She looked at him directly. I was afraid of what you'd say. What did you think I'd say? Something close to a real smile crossed her face. Not the professional warmth, not the gala charm, but something smaller and more genuine. Something honest and direct that would have made me have to acknowledge something I wasn't ready to acknowledge. He said nothing for a moment. I have a daughter, he said finally. I get home every night at a reasonable hour so she can fall asleep knowing I'll be there in the morning. I am not... He paused, choosing words carefully. I don't have room in my life for complicated things. I know that about you. And? She turned back to the window. And I did it anyway, she said, because I'm apparently not as sensible as I've always believed. The light had shifted all the way to early evening now, soft and indirect, and for a moment Victoria Sterling, with her armor mostly down and her shoulders carrying the weight of the whole impossible afternoon, looked less like a billion-dollar CEO and more like a 30-year-old woman sitting in an office that was too large for one person and trying to figure out what she was supposed to do next. Ethan looked at her. He thought about his daughter, asleep in a school that had better resources now because of a decision this woman had made quietly, without expectation of return. He thought about 4 seconds at a gala where the room had disappeared. He thought about all the good reasons to walk out the door and go back to the clean, manageable reality of access logs and rotation schedules. I'm not angry, he said. I want to be clear about that. She turned back. I know. I just needed to know the truth. I know that too. He nodded once. He moved toward the door. With his hand on the frame, he stopped, not because he'd planned to, not because it was a strategic moment, but because sometimes people say things because they need to be said, and there isn't a right time for them. For what it's worth, he said without turning around, Lily loves that program. She came home last week and told me about thermodynamics and then explained it better than I could have. He heard the small sound she made. Not quite a laugh, but something warmer than anything the gala had offered. He left her office. In the elevator, going down, he kept his eyes on the numbers and did not think about anything. He was getting better and better at being mostly unsuccessful. The weeks after their conversation in her office had a particular quality that Ethan couldn't quite name. Nothing had changed, technically. He still arrived at 7:15, still ran the access logs, still fell into step beside Victoria at the precise distance his job required. She still knocked before entering rooms, still called him Holloway in meetings, and Ethan in the 4-second windows between one obligation and the next, when the professional surface cracked just slightly and something more actual moved through. Nothing had changed. Everything felt different. He noticed things he had no business noticing. The way she rubbed the back of her neck when a meeting had gone 20 minutes longer than it should have. The specific quality of her silence when she was thinking through a problem versus when she was simply tired. She had 3 different versions of a smile. The one for cameras, the one for people she genuinely liked, and a third one, smaller and slower, that appeared when something surprised her into being pleased. He had been cataloging these things without meaning to for 2 years. Now he had stopped pretending he wasn't. This was, he was fully aware, a problem. He managed it the way he managed most inconvenient things, by staying busy. There was always work. The security team had 12 people on rotating shifts, and keeping 12 people running smoothly was a full-time occupation on its own before you added the travel logistics, the protocol reviews, the quarterly threat assessments that corporate required. He stayed late more often than he should have. Lily noticed. "You seem tired," she said one Thursday morning over cereal, with the directness of a child who hadn't yet learned to soften observations. "I'm fine." "Your eyes look the way they do when you've been staring at a screen too long. Finish your cereal." "I'm just saying." She ate a spoonful. "Maybe you should go to bed earlier." "I'll take that under advisement." She looked at him with the particular expression she'd inherited from her mother, a kind of patient, unimpressed appraisal that said she was not fooled but had decided not to push it. He missed Claire in those moments, the sharpness of that look. Lily was 8 years old and already more perceptive than half the adults Ethan dealt with professionally, and he didn't know whether to be proud of that or worried about it. "The STEM thing is on Saturday," Lily said. "Mrs. Okafor says we're doing circuits." "I know. I'll be there to drop you off." "You can stay if you want. Parents can stay." He looked at her. "You want me to stay?" She shrugged with the elaborate casualness of a child who wanted something and was refusing to visibly want it. "I don't care. It's fine either way. I'm just saying you could." He stayed. He sat in the back of the school's science room for 3 hours on a Saturday morning, watching his daughter build a simple circuit with 2 other kids she'd apparently decided were acceptable, and he drank bad coffee from a paper cup and felt, for the first time in several weeks, genuinely calm. On the walk home, Lily was talking about electrical resistance. She'd gotten the concept from one of the program's instructors and was now explaining it to Ethan with an 8-year-old's particular mix of accuracy and embellishment. "It's like when you have too many things plugged into the same outlet," she said, "and everything slows down because the electricity has to work harder. People can be like that too." "Can they?" "Yeah, like when you have too many things you're thinking about at the same time, you slow down." She looked up at him. "You've been slow lately." He glanced down at her. "You're very observant for someone who's supposed to be focused on her education." "Being observant is part of my education." She grabbed his hand without preamble, the way she'd been doing since she was 3, completely unself-conscious about it in the way children were before the world taught them to be. "Is it work stuff?" "Partly." "Is it your boss?" He missed a step, just slightly. "Why would it be my boss?" "Because you talk about her sometimes, and you get this face." "What face?" "The one you make when something is complicated and you're trying to make it not complicated by ignoring it." She said this with complete certainty. "It doesn't usually work, by the way. The ignoring." Ethan walked half a block in silence. "Where did you get that?" Lily shrugged again. "Sandra told me you do it. She said Grandma used to do it too, and it's a family thing. He was going to have a conversation with his sister about appropriate topics to discuss with 8-year-olds. He was absolutely going to have that conversation. My boss is my boss, he said. That's all. Lily considered this with the philosophical patience of someone who had decided to accept an answer without believing it. Okay, she said. Can we get dumplings on the way home? Yes. Good. She swung his hand once. The circuit thing was really cool, by the way. Thank you for staying. He squeezed her hand. Thanks for letting me, he said. The Monday after the Saturday program, Victoria called him into her office at 8 in the morning, which was unusual. Her first meeting was typically at 8:30, which meant she'd blocked time specifically for this, which meant it was either a security matter or something adjacent to one. He knocked. She called him in. She was standing at the window with her coffee, not behind her desk, which was itself a shift in body language that he noted automatically. Jacket on, fully composed, but the coffee cup was held in both hands rather than one. Another small tell, the two-handed hold that showed up when she was working through something. I need to tell you something, she said without preamble. All right. There's a situation developing that you're going to hear about through other channels, and I'd rather you hear it from me first. He waited. The board has been approached by a third party about a potential acquisition. Sterling Technologies as the target, not the acquirer. She turned from the window. Her face was controlled but not fully closed. He could see the effort it was taking. It's not a public offer yet. It's being framed as a merger conversation, but the structure is designed to dilute my position significantly. I'd be CEO in title only. Who's driving it? The approach came through an intermediary, but the capital structure points to Brennan Capital Partners. She set her coffee down. Which means it points to Richard Holt. Ethan knew the name. Most people in Chicago's business community did. Richard Holt was 61 years old, had built Brennan Capital into a mid-tier private equity firm over 30 years, and had a specific history with Sterling Technologies that predated Victoria's tenure. He'd been one of the original investors, had been gradually diluted out of meaningful influence as the company grew, and had never been quiet about his opinion that the company's direction under Victoria was too long-term focused and insufficiently attentive to near-term returns. When did you find out? Ethan asked. Friday evening, Douglas Ashford called me. A pause. To his credit, he called me directly instead of letting me find out from the board communication. That's something. It's not enough. She moved back toward her desk and sat, and the shift in posture was subtle but visible. She was pulling herself back together, reorienting from the person who was processing this to the executive who was going to handle it. I'm telling you because the security implications are real. If Holt's team is building a case for the acquisition, they'll be looking for leverage. That means they're probably already doing research. On me, on the company, on anyone in my immediate circle. Ethan felt something sharpen in his chest. On staff. Potentially. He thought about Marcus Reeves standing in his doorway 2 weeks ago asking about the gala. He thought about the careful pause before the mention of Lily's name. Has anyone on your team been approached? He asked. Or shown unusual behavior in the past month? Her eyes went to him. She read something in his face. You have something. Possibly. He told her about the Reeves conversation. The specific details, the timing, the mention of Lily. He kept it factual. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. I don't want to assume Marcus is involved, she said finally. He's been with the company for 6 years. I'm not assuming anything. I'm noting a data point. Can you look into it without him knowing? Yes. She nodded. The CEO face was fully back now, the processing complete, the plan forming. But she pressed her thumb against her finger once before she picked up her coffee cup again, and he saw it. Thank you, she said, for telling me about Reeves. You didn't have to. You told me to tell you things directly. I did. A brief pause. I appreciate that you listen. He moved toward the door, then stopped because apparently this was becoming a habit. Victoria. She looked up. Whatever Holt is trying to do, I want you to know that my team's first obligation is this company and the people in it. Not the board structure, not the acquisition politics. If something comes up that you need handled quietly, you come to me first. She studied him for a moment. Something passed across her face that was neither the CEO nor the woman he'd seen with her armor down. Something in between, something that had learned to occupy that middle space carefully. "I know," she said. "I know that." He left. Dead. The investigation into Reeves took 11 days and produced results that were both clearer and worse than Ethan had expected. He did it carefully, through channels that were entirely within his authority. Access logs, communication metadata that the security team monitored as standard protocol, cross-referenced against the company's data security policy. He didn't go looking for something specific. He went looking at patterns, which was different, and which was also what his job actually required him to do on an ongoing basis. The pattern he found was this. Over the past 6 weeks, Marcus Reeves had accessed files outside his normal operational scope. Not dramatically. Nothing that would have triggered an automatic flag. Small reaches. Due diligence documents related to the Meridian acquisition that weren't in his direct purview. Historical financial projections that predated his tenure. A folder of correspondence related to the Hollander lawsuit settlement that should have required a senior legal access level that Reeves didn't have, but had accessed through a shared credential that hadn't been properly restricted after a previous user's departure. The access pattern was consistent with someone building a picture. Not stealing data exactly. Nothing was copied to external drives. Nothing transmitted outside the network. Just reading. Assembling. The way someone assembled a narrative. On day 11, a cross-reference against the company's visitor management system turned up something more concrete. Richard Holt's name appeared in the building's visitor log. Not the corporate entry, but the secondary entrance used for private meetings in the executive suite. 4 months ago. The meeting was logged under a generic consulting designation, and the host was listed as Marcus Reeves. Ethan sat with this for about an hour before he went to Victoria. She was in a meeting when he arrived at her floor. Her assistant read his face and knocked on the conference room door without being asked, which was either very good intuition or an indication that Ethan looked more serious than he felt. He probably looked more serious than he felt. Victoria came out 2 minutes later. He told her in the hallway quietly, standing close enough that it was private, but not so close that it would read oddly to anyone passing. She listened with the stillness she used when she was absorbing something significant, completely motionless, eyes on him, processing. When he finished, she was quiet for 5 seconds. "He was in the building," she said, 4 months ago, before the formal approach through the board. "So they've been building this longer than I thought." "Yes." She looked past him for a moment at the glass-walled conference room where her meeting was still in progress, visible through the transparent walls. 4 people around a table waiting for her to come back in. "I need to think about how to handle Marcus. I can't move on him yet without tipping Holt that we know." "I know." "Can you keep the file quiet? Just the 2 of us?" "Yes." She looked back at him. There was something in her expression that was not quite what he'd seen in her office after the scholarship conversation, but adjacent to it. The same stripped-down quality, the same absence of the usual professional buffer. "I hate this," she said simply. It wasn't a complaint exactly. It was just the truth of it, the particular exhaustion of discovering that someone you'd trusted had been quietly building a case against you while sitting at meetings and eating lunch in the same building and asking questions about your head of security's kid with manufactured friendliness. "I know," he said. It was inadequate. He said it anyway. 6 years, she said. "He's been here 6 years. People make choices." "I know they do." She pressed her lips together briefly. "I just keep thinking I should have seen it. You run a company. You can't watch everyone. That's what I have you for. And I didn't see it early enough either." She looked at him for a moment. "You saw it before it cost me anything." "We don't know that yet." "No," she agreed. "We don't." She straightened slightly, the professional surface reassembling itself with the practiced efficiency he'd watched her deploy 100 times. "Go back to your office. I'll finish this meeting. We'll talk tonight. I have a dinner obligation, but I'll be back by 8:30. Can you stay?" He thought about Lily. Sandra was available on Mondays. "Yes." "Thank you." She turned back toward the conference room, paused with her hand on the door. "Ethan." "Yeah." "For what it's worth, you saw it. That matters. She went back into the meeting. He stood in the hallway for a second longer than necessary. The building moved around him. People with coffees, conversations about quarterly targets, the ordinary texture of a corporate day continuing its ordinary business in complete ignorance of the thing quietly unraveling underneath it. He went back to his office. He called Sandra to confirm she could stay with Lily. He stared at the access log on his monitor for a while and thought about the visitor record, 4 months old, sitting in a database that nobody had thought to look at until now. About the way things that could hurt you were often already in motion before you had any reason to be afraid of them. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. Mrs. Okafor says Lily explained Ohm's law to the class today. First try, no notes. Thought you'd want to know. Sandra. He sat back in his chair. He smiled at his phone in an empty office, alone, with a file full of evidence of betrayal open on his left screen, and felt the strange, irrefutable weight of the fact that his life contained both of these things simultaneously, the complicated and the good, running alongside each other without resolution. He typed back, "Tell her I said that's my girl." Then he turned back to the monitor. He had 8 hours before Victoria came back at 8:30, and there was more work to do. Victoria came back at 8:22, not 8:30, which meant the dinner had ended early or she'd cut it short. Ethan was in the small conference room on her floor that she used for after-hours conversations, the one with the frosted glass panels that gave the illusion of privacy without actually providing it. He'd been there since 8, going through the documentation again, making sure everything was in order. She came in still wearing her coat, which she didn't take off. She sat across from him, looked at the papers he'd laid out, and said, "Show me everything." He did. He walked her through the access pattern, the visitor log, the timeline of Reeves' movements against the timeline of Holt's approach to the board. He kept it sequential and factual, the way he'd been trained to present security assessments. No editorializing, just the architecture of what had happened and when. She didn't interrupt. She asked 2 questions, both precise, both about specific dates. When he finished, she sat back and stared at the ceiling for a moment. He was helping Holt build the case before Holt even made the approach, she said. So the board presentation wasn't exploratory. It was already packaged. That's what the timeline suggests. What Holt needs is leverage, not just financial arguments. He knows the financials aren't enough. He needs something personal, something that reads as a governance failure. She lowered her gaze from the ceiling and looked at Ethan directly. Which brings us back to the gala. The quiet that followed had weight to it. "He's going to use us," Ethan said. "He's going to try to." She pulled one of the documents toward her and studied it without really reading it. If Holt can get something into the press, something that makes it look like I'm making decisions influenced by a personal relationship with an employee, the board doesn't have to do anything dramatic. The optics alone are enough to get 3 or 4 members to vote for a governance review. And a governance review at this stage, with an acquisition offer already on the table, is effectively a forced sale. Do you think Reeves has anything concrete? I think Reeves has been watching us for weeks and is very good at constructing a narrative from incomplete information. She set the document down. He doesn't need proof of anything. He needs a headline. Ethan thought about this. So we move on him now, before he has a chance to bring anything to Holt. We can't. Not yet. She pressed her palms flat on the table. If we terminate Reeves without cause, he goes straight to the press with whatever he has and frames it as retaliation. We need him to make a visible, documentable move first. That means waiting. That means waiting. She said it with the particular flatness of someone accepting a tactical reality they hated. And it means being very careful in the meantime. The room was quiet. The building had emptied out hours ago. The after-hours cleaning crew had come and gone on this floor, and below them Chicago was doing whatever Chicago did at 9 p.m. on a Monday, which was mostly moving fast and not paying attention to 2 people in a frosted glass conference room, figuring out how much danger they were actually in. "I need to ask you something," Victoria said. "Go ahead." "If this goes public, whatever version Holt and Reeves put together, it's going to involve you. Your name, your daughter's name possibly, the foundation grants. The whole thing gets turned into a story about favoritism and poor judgment." She paused. "I need to know if you can handle that." He looked at her. "Are you asking if I'll stay?" I'm asking if you understand what staying means. I understand what staying means. She held his gaze. Ethan, they will make it ugly. The press doesn't care about accuracy, they care about the shape of a story. And the shape of this story is a CEO. Sleeping with her security chief and using company resources to, I know what the shape of the story is. Your daughter, Victoria. He said it quietly, but with enough weight that she stopped. I've thought about all of it. I thought about it before you did, probably, because that's my job. I'm supposed to see the threat before you're looking at it. He leaned forward slightly. I'm not going anywhere. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face. Not the relief he might have expected, but something more complicated than that. Something that looked a little like being overwhelmed and choosing not to show it. Okay, she said. Okay. She stood, finally took her coat off, and draped it over the back of the chair. It was such a small thing, a coat being taken off, but it felt like a decision, like staying for a while instead of being perpetually ready to leave. Tell me something that has nothing to do with any of this, she said. He looked at her. What? I've been in this building for 14 hours. I've been in crisis mode for 4 days running. I just need... She made a short, frustrated gesture. Tell me something normal. Something about your week that has nothing to do with Holt or Reeves or the board. He thought about it. Lily explained Ohm's law to her class today, he said. First try, no notes. Victoria blinked, then she laughed. A real one. Short and sudden and surprised. Nothing like the professional warmth she deployed in meetings. It transformed her face entirely, just for a second, into something younger and less armored and genuinely delighted. That's wonderful, she said, and she meant it. She's been talking about circuits all week. I know more about electrical resistance than I ever wanted to. How old is she again? 8. 8. She shook her head slightly, still smiling. What is she like? He considered the question. People asked it sometimes in the polite, automatic way, the obligatory interest in a colleague's kid. But Victoria was looking at him with actual curiosity, her head tilted slightly, waiting. She's sharp, he said. Sharp in the way that catches you off guard. She notices things you think you're hiding. She has opinions about everything, and she states them without apology, but she's not unkind about it. He paused. She makes me better at my job, honestly. Having to be home every night, having to be present, it keeps me from disappearing into the work the way I used to. Victoria was quiet for a moment. The way you used to. Before she was born, I was very good at working constantly. Claire used to say I treated rest like a character flaw. It was the first time he'd said Claire's name to Victoria. He hadn't planned it. It came out because the conversation had moved into territory where it fit naturally, and he'd learned over the years that fighting those moments was more effortful than letting them happen. Victoria didn't make it strange. She just asked, carefully, how long? 4 years. Lily was 4 when we lost her. He kept his voice even, the way he'd learned to. Not detached, just steady. Car accident. She was coming home from a conference in Milwaukee. It was winter. The roads were bad. I'm sorry. Thank you. He looked at the table. The first year was... I don't have a word for what the first year was. I was trying to do this job and be everything for Lily, and I was failing at both simultaneously. And Sandra basically moved in for 6 months without being asked. He shook his head. You find out a lot about people in that kind of year. You find out a lot about yourself, too, I imagine. Yeah. He looked up. What about you? She raised an eyebrow. You said you understand what lonely looks like, he said. At the gala. You said... Actually, you didn't say it, but I saw it. She was quiet for a long moment. Long enough that he thought she might deflect, might reestablish the professional surface and redirect them back to Holt and Reeves and the board. Then she sat down again and folded her hands on the table. I've been building this company since I was 24, she said. I took it from 40 employees in a Series B funding round to what it is now. It's the thing I'm proudest of in my life, and I don't apologize for it. She paused. But the cost of it is that I have been, for the better part of 6 years, completely alone in a very specific way. Not without people. I have people around me constantly, but none of them are there because of you." She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "exactly that." The honesty of it sat between them, plain and a little uncomfortable the way honest things sometimes were. "The men who've been interested in me since I became what I am," she continued, "have been interested in what I am, the access, the status, the association. And I'm not naive about it. I understood that from fairly early on, and I adjusted accordingly." She pressed her thumb against her finger under the table, then seemed to catch herself doing it and stopped. "What I didn't account for was how tired I would be of adjusting." He said nothing. She wasn't asking for a response. She was doing what people did when they finally said the thing they'd been not saying. Just saying it, letting it be real. "You never treated me like what I am," she said. "You've always just treated me like who I am." Which sounds simple. It isn't. "No," he said, "it isn't." They sat in the quiet for a while after that, just the two of them in a glass-walled room with the city dark beyond the windows. And it was the least professional moment in 2 years of professional proximity, and neither of them did anything about it, and neither of them looked away. The headline broke on a Thursday morning, 17 days later. Ethan saw it at 6:40 a.m. on his phone before he was fully awake, which was how he saw most bad news, in that liminal, unguarded moment before the day had properly assembled itself around him. Sterling Tech. CEO's personal relationship with security chief raises governance questions. Sources say Victoria Sterling used company foundation funds to benefit employees' family. He read it twice. His stomach went cold and flat in the specific way it did when a threat materialized that he'd been tracking and had hoped, against reasonable expectation, wouldn't. He called Victoria's cell before he got out of bed. She answered on the second ring, which meant she'd already seen it. "I'm looking at it," she said. Her voice was controlled. Barely. "How bad is the sourcing?" "Anonymous. 2 sources described as company insiders. The foundation grant is named specifically. Eastview Elementary. The amount. The timing." A pause. "The framing is that I directed foundation resources to a school connected to an employee I was personally involved with." "You weren't personally involved with me when the grant was made." "I know that. The article doesn't care about the timeline." He was already out of bed, moving. "Who else has it?" 3 other outlets picked it up in the last hour. It's syndicated." Another pause. Longer this time. "Douglas Ashford has called twice. I haven't picked up." "Don't pick up until you've talked to legal." "I know, Ethan." "Your PR team. Already on it. They're drafting a response." He heard her exhale through her nose. "The board meeting is in 6 days. Holt's people have already pushed for an emergency session." 6 days. The shape of it was clear now. The article wasn't just a story, it was a move. The timing was surgical. 6 days before a scheduled board discussion about the acquisition, a governance scandal drops into the news cycle. Board members who had been undecided were now going to spend 6 days fielding calls from investors, asking questions. "I need to see the documentation today," Ethan said. "Everything we have on Reeves and the Holt connection. We have to be ready to use it." "Not yet." Her voice had changed. Not colder exactly, but more deliberate, more controlled. "I need to think about this." "Victoria." "I said I need to think." A beat. "I'll call you when I'm at the office. Don't come in early. Don't do anything that looks reactive." He stopped moving. "All right." She hung up. He stood in his bedroom in the early morning gray and thought about the architecture of what was happening. The article was designed to do 2 things: create board pressure before the emergency session and force Victoria into a defensive posture that made her look guilty of something whether she responded or didn't. The longer she stayed quiet, the more the story breathed. The more she said, the more she fed it. The only move that actually helped her was the one that blew up Reeves and the Holt connection publicly before the board meeting. But doing that exposed the surveillance work Ethan had been doing for the past 3 weeks, and doing it in the press instead of in a boardroom made it look like a counterattack rather than evidence. He went to make coffee. He made Lily's lunch while the coffee brewed, the ordinary morning routine continuing its ordinary business while the situation arranged itself in his mind. Sandra appeared in the kitchen doorway at 7, pre-coffee and squinting. I saw the news. Don't. I'm not saying anything. Good. I'm just... Sandra. She held up both hands. Okay, fine. She moved toward the coffee maker. Is she going to be all right? He thought about Victoria's voice on the phone, the control in it, the particular quality of someone holding something very tightly because the alternative was not holding it at all. I don't know yet, he said honestly. The next 4 days were a controlled burn. Ethan went to work. He did his job. He maintained the exact professional distance his role required, and he watched Marcus Reeves move through the building with the particular studied casualness of a man who believed he had already won and was simply waiting for the outcome to formalize itself. Reeves was friendly in meetings, responsive in emails, available and collegial, and utterly unreadable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. Ethan was paying very close attention. On day 2, the second wave of coverage hit. This one had photographs, taken at the gala, Ethan and Victoria moving through the crowd together, the specific body language of two people in close proximity. In the context of the article, the photos looked like everything the story was claiming. Out of context, they were a security professional doing his job. Context, Ethan had learned a long time ago, was the first casualty in any narrative war. On day 3, Victoria issued a statement through her PR team. It was carefully worded, professional, denied any personal relationship with Ethan specifically, and affirmed the legitimacy of the foundation grant through standard review processes. It was the right statement. It changed almost nothing, because correct statements rarely did when the story had already found its shape in the public imagination. He read it at his desk and felt, with cold clarity, the particular distance she had put between them with the words "no personal relationship." He knew why she'd said it. He knew it was strategically necessary. He knew it was protective of him, of Lily, of the foundation work that would be tainted by association if the story deepened. He knew all of that. He also sat with it for about an hour and felt it in the specific way that things felt when you'd been careful about something for a long time and then found out the carefulness hadn't been enough protection anyway. On day 4, Lily came home from school quiet. He noticed immediately the particular quality of her silence, which was different from her thinking silence or her tired silence. She set her backpack down and got a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter drinking it without talking, which she never did. Lily was constitutionally incapable of silence for more than 45 seconds unless something was wrong. "Tell me," he said. She turned the glass in her hands. Emma Carver said something at lunch. Emma Carver was a classmate whose mother, Ethan happened to know, worked in financial media. What did she say? She said her mom said your boss did something wrong and that you were part of it. Lily set the glass down. She said it in front of everybody. Ethan sat down at the kitchen table. "Come here." Lily came and sat across from him. She was 8 years old and her face had that particular look of a child who had been hurt in public and hadn't cried about it yet because crying in front of people felt worse than the hurt. Emma Carver's mom read something in the news, he said carefully. And the news story is, it's not accurate. It took some true things and put them together in a way that makes them mean something different than what they actually mean. Like a lie? Not exactly. More like, you know how if you take just one part of a sentence, it can mean something completely different than the whole sentence? She considered this. Like if someone said, "I don't like this about something bad," but then someone else only told people the "I don't like this" part without saying what the "this" was. Exactly like that. She was quiet for a moment. "Is your boss going to be okay?" He looked at his daughter, who had been embarrassed at lunch by a classmate's secondhand accusation, and whose first question, once she understood the shape of the thing, was whether someone else was going to be okay. "I hope so," he said. "I'm trying to help make sure of it." "Because it's your job?" A pause. "Partly because it's my job." She looked at him with that look, the Claire look, the patient, unimpressed appraisal that didn't ask for more than what was true. "And partly because she matters to you," Lily said. He didn't answer. She slid off her chair. "That's okay, Dad." She picked up her backpack. "I like that she helped our school." She paused at the hallway entrance. Emma Carver was being mean anyway. Her ecosystem project was about suburbs. Suburbs aren't even a real ecosystem. She disappeared down the hall. Ethan sat at the kitchen table for a while after that. Then he picked up his phone and called Victoria. She answered after 4 rings, later than usual. "How are you?" he asked. A pause. "I've been better." "I know." He kept his voice even. "I need you to hear something. What you said in the statement, the no personal relationship part. I understand why you said it." She was quiet. "I'm not—" He stopped, started again. "I just need you to know that it didn't change anything. On my end, none of this changes anything." The silence on her end lasted long enough that he thought the call might have dropped. Then she said very quietly, "Ethan." "Yeah." "I wrote that statement 4 times. Her voice was stripped of its usual control. Not broken, but unguarded in a way he'd only heard once before. In an office at 4:30 in the afternoon when she'd admitted she'd done something kind without expectation of return. "Every version I tried to write, I kept—" She stopped. "I kept wanting to write something true instead." He closed his eyes for a second. 6 days, he said. "We get through the board meeting and then we deal with the rest of it. And if the board goes against me, it won't. You can't know that." "No," he said, "but I have something that will matter. And I will be in that room when it matters." Another silence, longer this time. "I should have told you something earlier," she said. "What?" "That I'm glad you're the one standing next to me in all of this." A pause. "I don't say things like that enough. I'm aware of it." He thought about 4 seconds at a gala, about a conference room at 9 p.m. with a coat draped over a chair, about his daughter asking if his boss was nice and him saying she's complicated when the truth was more than that and had always been more than that. "Get some sleep," he said. 6 days. 6 days, she agreed. He hung up. Outside the kitchen window, Chicago moved on in the dark, indifferent and constant, the way cities were, absorbing every private crisis into their general noise without breaking stride. He sat with the quiet for a little while longer. Then he went to check on Lily. The morning of the board meeting, Ethan woke up at 4:30 and couldn't get back to sleep. He lay in the dark for 20 minutes doing the thing he'd trained himself not to do. Running scenarios, mapping outcomes, calculating the variables he couldn't control. Then he got up, made coffee, and sat at the kitchen table with his documentation spread in front of him for the 4th time in 6 days. Going through it again, not because he'd missed anything, but because going through it was the only thing that felt like doing something. The file was solid. He knew it was solid. 11 days of access logs, the visitor record, a timeline that placed Reeves in communication with Holt's organization 4 months before the board approach. He had a forensic copy of the credential misuse, documented through proper security protocol, legally defensible. He had dates, he had records, he had the architecture of a conspiracy laid out in plain sequential order. What he didn't have was certainty about how the board would receive it. Evidence was one thing. A room full of people who had spent a week being worked by Holt's people and reading coverage that had already shaped their understanding of the situation was another thing entirely. He drank his coffee and thought about Victoria. She had called him at 11 the previous night. Not about the board meeting, not about strategy. She'd called because she couldn't sleep either, and she'd been rereading the Foundation grant documentation, and she'd found a procedural discrepancy in the way the Eastview grant had been categorized internally. Something that wasn't wrong, but could be made to look ambiguous if someone wanted to make it look ambiguous. It went through the standard review committee, she'd said. 4 members, all independent from operations. The paperwork is clean. Then it's clean, he'd said. Holt's lawyer is going to say the committee composition was influenced. Was it? A pause. No. Then we say that, directly, without qualifying it. She'd been quiet for a moment. You're very calm about this. One of us has to be. I'm calm. You called me at 11 p.m. to discuss grant categorization. Another pause. I'm mostly calm. He'd heard something shift in her voice then. Not quite a laugh, but the pressure valve releasing slightly. Go to sleep, he'd said. The documentation holds. I'll be in the room tomorrow. You don't have to be in the room. It's a board meeting. I'll be in the building. Same difference. She hadn't argued. He finished his coffee now, checked the time, 5:15, and went to get dressed. The meeting was at 10. He had 4 hours and 45 minutes, and he was going to use every one of them. He dropped Lily at school at 7:40. She was quiet in the car, which was her version of being considerate. She'd picked up enough from the previous days to understand that this morning was significant, and she expressed her understanding by not making demands on his attention. At the school entrance, she climbed out and then turned back. "Dad? Yeah? You know how sea stars can grow back what they lose?" He looked at her. "Yeah, Bug, I know." "She can too." She said it with the complete confidence of an 8-year-old stating a fact about the natural world, then turned and walked into the building. He sat in the parked car for a moment with his hands on the wheel. Then he drove to the office. Sterling Technologies headquarters had a particular quality on board meeting days, a kind of heightened self-conscious energy that moved through the building like weather. People spoke in slightly lower voices. The executive floor assistants moved with more purpose than usual. The conference rooms on the 34th floor, where the board convened, had been prepared the day before. Fresh materials, updated financials, the specific arrangement of chairs and water glasses that signaled the formal machinery of corporate governance operating at full weight. Ethan arrived at 7:50 and went directly to his office. He checked in with his team, confirmed the building's security status, and then pulled up the board meeting schedule on his secondary monitor. The session was scheduled to run from 10 to 1, with a closed executive session from 10 to 11:30, followed by a general session. He was not on the agenda. He had not asked to be on the agenda. He had, however, spent the previous afternoon having a 40-minute conversation with Douglas Ashford. The conversation had been Ashford's idea. The older man had appeared at the security office door on Tuesday afternoon with the slightly formal discomfort of someone doing something they felt obligated to do but hadn't done before. He'd sat down, looked at Ethan for a long moment, and said, "I want to understand what you know." Ethan had made a judgment call. He'd shown Ashford the documentation. Not all of it. He'd shown him the visitor log and the access pattern, the core of the Reeves-Holt connection, enough to establish the architecture of what had happened without exposing the full scope of the security investigation. Ashford had sat with it for a long time, asking precise, quiet questions, the kind that told you the person asking had been around corporate politics long enough to know exactly what they were looking at. "If this is accurate," Ashford had said finally, "then what Holt is presenting to the board as a governance concern is itself a governance violation." "That's correct. And Reeves facilitated it from inside the company." "Yes." Ashford had looked at the table. "I've known Marcus Reeves for 6 years." "I know. I recommended him for the acquisitions role." Ethan hadn't said anything. "Victoria needs to present this herself," Ashford had said after a long pause. "In the room. Not through an intermediary, not through legal, not in a press statement. She needs to stand up and put it in front of the board directly. That's the only way it reads as strength rather than defense." "I know that. She knows that." Ashford had looked at him then, a long, assessing look that reminded Ethan of men he'd encountered in his military service. The ones with the specific gravity of people who had seen a lot of situations resolve badly and had stopped being surprised by it. "You care about her," he'd said. "Not an accusation, just a fact being named." "I work for her." "Both things can be true." Ashford had stood. "Make sure she's ready." Now, sitting in his office at 8 a.m. on the morning of the board meeting, Ethan thought about that conversation and about the slim margin between what the documentation proved and what a room of 9 board members, some of whom had been living inside Holt's narrative for weeks, would choose to believe. He thought about Victoria standing up in that room alone. He picked up his phone and sent her a text. "Documentation is ready. Ashford is prepared. You have this." She replied 3 minutes later. "I know, thank you." Then, 30 seconds after that, Lily texted me. He stared at his phone. "What?" She said, "Sea stars grow back what they lose. My dad will explain." Then a picture of a tide pool. He put his phone face down on his desk and pressed his hand over his mouth. His daughter had gotten Victoria's number from somewhere. Probably from his phone, probably weeks ago, filed away with the patient. Premeditated sneakiness of a child who planned things without announcing she was planning them. He picked the phone back up. I apologize for my daughter. Victoria, don't. It's the nicest thing anyone has said to me all week. He set the phone down and looked at his monitor and felt against the weight of everything. The documentation and the board meeting and the week of press coverage and the cold, flat knowledge that the next 4 hours could go wrong in a dozen ways. Something that was simply, inconveniently, unmistakably good. At 9:55, he positioned himself in the security station on the 34th floor, a small room adjacent to the main corridor, with a monitor feed from the building's internal camera system. It was a legitimate security post. He had full authority to be there, and from the monitor, he had a sight line to the entrance of the main boardroom. He watched the board members arrive. 9 people, all of whom he knew by face and by the particular ways they moved through the building. He watched Holt's proxy on the board, a man named Garrett Sims, who had joined 8 months ago through an investor rights provision, arrive 5 minutes early and spend 4 minutes in conversation with his phone in a corner of the corridor in the careful way of someone coordinating timing. He watched Marcus Reeves arrive on the executive floor at 9:58, which was unusual. Reeves had no role in the board meeting, no reason to be on this floor. He was dressed more formally than his typical Monday, which was either confidence or performance. He stood near the elevator bank with coffee, scrolling his phone, visible from the corridor. Ethan noted the time, noted Reeves' position, said nothing. At 10:02, Victoria came off the elevator. She was wearing a charcoal suit that he'd seen twice before. She wore it for presentations that mattered, he'd noticed, not the showier pieces she wore for events. Her hair was down, which was also a choice. She usually pinned it for board meetings. She was carrying the leather folio she used for documents. She looked, to anyone who didn't know what to look for, completely composed. He could see, from the corridor monitor, that her hand at her side was pressing thumb to index finger. She glanced toward the security station. The cameras weren't positioned to confirm she could see the room clearly, but the look was deliberate, a beat in her movement that said she was checking for something specific. He wasn't sure if she could see him behind the monitor glass. He straightened anyway. She walked into the boardroom. The door closed. Ethan sat back in his chair, kept his eyes on the corridor monitor, and waited. The closed session ran an hour and 40 minutes, which was 30 minutes longer than scheduled. Ethan tracked this in real time, noting each 10-minute increment past the expected 11:30 end time as a data point he couldn't fully interpret. Long could mean thorough deliberation. Long could mean a fight. Long could mean the board had asked for more documentation and Victoria was providing it. Long could mean any of 15 things, and he had no way to know which. At 12:19, the door opened. The first person out was Garrett Sims, Holt's proxy. He looked like a man who had expected to emerge from a room with a particular outcome and hadn't. The particular flatness of disappointed calculation. Then Douglas Ashford, who caught Ethan's eye through the corridor glass and gave him nothing. No nod, no expression, nothing readable, which was either neutral or deliberately neutral. And Ethan had been in enough high-stakes rooms to know that deliberately neutral from someone like Ashford usually meant something had been decided, and it wasn't his place to signal it. The other board members filed out in small clusters. Normal post-meeting behavior. The immediate dispersal. The private conversations resuming where the formal session had paused them. Victoria came out last. She stopped in the corridor just outside the boardroom door. She stood there for a moment, alone, and Ethan watched her from the monitor, the set of her shoulders, the quality of her stillness. Then she turned and looked directly at the security station. He was already moving. He came out of the security station and into the corridor, and she turned to face him, and for a long moment neither of them said anything. The corridor had cleared. The other board members had moved toward the elevator bank or the smaller conference rooms, and the executive floor assistants had retreated with the good instincts of people who understood when proximity was not helpful. "Well," he said. "They voted." She paused. 8-1 against the governance review. The weight of the week released from somewhere behind his sternum in a way he hadn't fully anticipated. A physical thing, the dropping of something he'd been holding up without realizing how much effort it was taking. 8-1, he said. Sims was the one. She said it flatly. No surprise. Ashford presented the documentation in the closed session. I walked them through the timeline, the access records, the visitor log. She paused. 3 board members asked for legal review of the Eastview grant. I said, fine, it's clean, it'll hold. Another pause. Holt's acquisition offer is effectively dead. Without the governance angle, he doesn't have the board leverage for the structure he needs. And Reeves? Something moved through her expression. He's been placed on administrative leave pending HR investigation. Legal will take it from there. She said it without satisfaction, which he appreciated. There was nothing satisfying about it, just the necessary weight of consequence catching up with a choice someone had made. He nodded. She looked at him. You went to Ashford. He came to me. You showed him the documentation before you told me you were going to. I showed him enough to confirm what he was already suspicious of. Everything material, you presented yourself. She held his gaze for a moment. He wasn't sure if she was going to be bothered by it. The independent move, the judgment call he'd made without consulting her. He'd thought about it. He'd decided it was the right call. He was prepared to defend it, but she just said, "Good call," and looked away down the corridor. Victoria. She turned back. "It's over," he said. "For today, it's over. You should—" He stopped. "You should let yourself feel that." She looked at him with the expression that didn't have a clean name, the one he'd cataloged over 2 years without ever finding the right word for it, something that lived in the space between the armor and what was underneath, something that was learning, slowly and imperfectly, how to exist in the open. "I don't know how to just feel things," she said. "I'm aware that's a problem." "It's not a problem. It's a work in progress." She made a short sound that was adjacent to a laugh. "That's generous." "It's accurate." She looked down the corridor toward the elevator bank, then back at him. "I need to call my legal team, and then my PR team, and then probably Ashford again, and then—" She stopped. "There's a lot. There's always a lot." "I know." A pause. "But right now, in this moment, before all of it, I want to say something." He waited. "I've been thinking about what I told you in that conference room," she said, "about building this thing alone, about being tired of adjusting." She pressed her thumb against her finger, caught herself, stopped, let her hand be still at her side instead. A conscious choice. "I'm not good at this part. The saying what's true about how I feel part. I manage everything else but this part. I'm genuinely not good at it." "I know. I'm telling you that up front so you have accurate information." "I appreciate the disclosure." The corner of her mouth moved. "Ethan." "Yeah." "Thank you." She said it differently than she'd said it before. Not the professional courtesy, not the careful appreciation of service rendered. Just 2 words with the full weight of what the week had been behind them. For being in the building, for the file, for not going anywhere when it would have been the sensible choice. He looked at her. The corridor was quiet around them, and the city outside the floor-to-ceiling windows was doing its city things. Moving, noise, the endless impersonal business of a million people who had no idea what had just happened in a boardroom on the 34th floor. "It was never a sensible choice either way," he said. "I stopped being capable of the sensible choice a while ago." She studied him. "How long ago?" He thought about it honestly. About a gala and a midnight blue dress and 4 seconds where the room disappeared. "About 8 months, give or take." Something shifted in her face. Not the CEO smile, not the professional warmth, not any of the careful, managed expressions he'd spent 2 years cataloging. Something real and a little unsteady. The expression of a woman who had been braced for something and found, instead, solid ground. "I was at 6 months," she said quietly. "So you were behind." "I'm catching up." She looked at him for a moment more. Then she picked up her folio, straightened her jacket, and turned toward the elevator. "I have to make these calls." "I know." She got 3 steps down the corridor before she turned back around. "Are you free Saturday?" He hadn't been expecting that specific pivot. "Depends on the situation." Lily mentioned at some point when she apparently got my number and decided we were on texting terms, that she wants to see the lakefront tide pools, the ones at the nature preserve north of the city. She paused. "I looked it up. Apparently there are sea stars." He stood in the corridor on the 34th floor of a building that had just survived an attempted hostile takeover, and he felt something settle into place in his chest with the quiet certainty of a thing that had been moving toward its position for a long time. "Saturday works," he said. "Good." She turned back toward the elevator. "Tell your daughter she has terrible boundaries and excellent instincts. She gets both from her mother." Victoria stepped into the elevator. Just before the doors closed, she looked at him one more time, and it was the third version of her smile, the small one, the one that appeared when something surprised her into being genuinely pleased. It was the one he had no word for and had been cataloging anyway. The doors closed. He stood in the corridor for a moment. Then he went back to his office, sat down at his desk, and pulled up the incident report he needed to file on the Reeves documentation. Standard protocol. Thorough, sequential, factual. He started typing. Halfway through the first paragraph, his phone buzzed. Lily. Did it work? Did she win? He looked at the message, then looked at the ceiling for a second. Ethan. Yes, she won. Lily. I knew it. C stars. Ethan. Go back to class. Lily. I'm at class. Mrs. Okafor lets me have my phone for the timer. We're doing circuits again. Ethan. Pay attention to the circuits. Lily. I'm always paying attention. You just can't tell from the outside. He set the phone face down on his desk and went back to the incident report. He was smiling at the screen in an empty office and making no effort to stop. The Saturday after the board meeting was cold, the way early November in Chicago was cold. Not the brutal wind tunnel cold of January that tourists complained about and locals had stopped feeling, but the first real cold, the kind that reminded you winter was not a threat but a certainty, and that the time for pretending otherwise was over. Ethan drove north along the lake with Lily in the back seat narrating everything she'd read about the nature preserve's intertidal zones, which was considerable. She'd been preparing for this outing since Wednesday, which was when she'd apparently confirmed it with Victoria directly through a text chain that Ethan had seen only in fragments, and that had, from what he could piece together, involved Lily sending Victoria 3 separate articles about C-star regeneration and Victoria responding with genuine questions that Lily had answered with the thoroughness of a child who took being taken seriously, very seriously. She asked me if the regeneration worked on all species or just certain ones, Lily said from the back seat. So I looked it up. And? Not all of them. Some C-stars can regenerate a whole new body from just one arm if the arm has enough of the central disc attached. But some species can only grow back the arm, not generate a new body from the arm alone. She paused. I told her that. She said that was more complicated than she expected. What did you say? I said most things are. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. Victoria was already at the preserve when they arrived. He saw her car in the small gravel lot, a dark sedan with a driver who had strict instructions, Ethan knew, to stay with the vehicle. She was standing near the trailhead in a coat he hadn't seen before, charcoal gray, practical rather than impressive, and she was looking at her phone with the focused expression of someone reading something real rather than performing busyness. She looked up when they pulled in. Lily was out of the car before Ethan had fully stopped, which was both against his repeated instructions and entirely predictable. She jogged across the gravel with her backpack. She'd packed materials for a tide pool observation journal, a project she'd invented independently and announced as mandatory, and stopped in front of Victoria with the directness of a child who had decided this person was worth knowing and had therefore already decided they were known. You came, Lily said. Victoria looked at her with an expression Ethan couldn't fully see from the car. I said I would. Some people say they will, and then they don't. I know, I'm not one of those people. Lily considered this for exactly 1 second and then said, Good. The best pools are on the north side. The docent told me when I called ahead. She turned and started up the trail, already narrating. Ethan came to stand beside Victoria, and they both watched Lily's backpack disappear around the first bend with the purposeful energy of a child on a mission. She called the preserve ahead of time, Victoria said. She plans things without telling you she's planning them. I gathered. She glanced at him sideways. She's remarkable. She's a lot, he said, which is different. No, it isn't. She said it simply, with the certainty of someone who had thought about it. Then she turned up the trail and he fell into step beside her. They walked for a while without talking, which was its own kind of thing, a silence that wasn't empty, that had the quality of two people who had stopped needing to fill space between them. The trail ran along the bluff above the lake, bare trees on one side and the gray water stretching east on the other. November light flat and clear in the way of late autumn, no warmth in it, but enough illumination to see everything sharply. Lily was 20 yards ahead, already crouching at the first accessible pool with her journal open. "How's the legal review going?" Ethan asked. "Clean, as expected. The grant committee documentation is complete and independent. Holt's team has gone quiet, which either means they're accepting the outcome or building something else." She paused. "I'm assuming building something else because that's who Richard Holt is. And if they are, then we'll deal with it when it's in front of us." She said it without the tightness that would have been in her voice 3 weeks ago. The same words, but carrying less weight now. Something had shifted after the board meeting, some fundamental recalibration of how she held the ongoing difficulty of being who she was. The Reeves situation had moved through HR and legal with the methodical inevitability of institutional process. His access had been terminated, his employment ended, his involvement with Holt's team documented formally. He hadn't made a scene, which Ethan had half expected. He'd simply gone. People who planned things carefully were rarely surprised when they got caught, because somewhere in their planning, they'd always understood it was possible. "I've been thinking about something," Victoria said. "Tell me." She was quiet for a few steps, watching Lily crouch lower over the tide pool and say something to herself in the focused murmur of deep concentration. "I've been thinking about the statement I put out, the no personal relationship part." He waited. "It was the right tactical call. I still believe that it protected you. It protected the foundation work. It kept the story from getting worse in the short term." She paused. "But I've been sitting with the fact that I made a public statement about my own life that was strategically accurate and personally false. And I did it without hesitation, without even calling you first." She looked at him briefly, then back at the trail. "That bothers me." "It shouldn't. You made the right call for the situation. That's not the point I'm making." He thought about it. "You're saying you did it the way you do everything, alone, fast, without asking." "Yes." A pause. "I'm not built for collaboration. I'm aware of it. I've run this company by making fast, unilateral decisions and being right often enough that nobody required me to change the pattern." She stopped walking and turned to face him. The lake was behind her, flat and gray, the light doing that particular thing it did in November where everything looked true. "I don't want to do that with you. I don't want to make decisions about us without talking to you, even when the decision is obvious, even when there isn't time." She paused. "I'm telling you this so you know the work in progress is ongoing. It's not finished." He looked at her. The coat suited her better than the gala gown had, somehow, or rather it suited her differently, the way everyday clothes suited people more truly than the things they wore for performance. "I know it's not finished," he said. "Mine isn't either." "What's yours?" "Letting people in." He said it without drama because it didn't need any. "I've been very good, for 4 years, at being self-sufficient. It was adaptive. It was what Lily needed, a parent who was stable and present and not falling apart. But I got so good at it that I turned it into a personality trait instead of a coping mechanism." He paused. "I'm working on knowing the difference." She looked at him. "How's that going?" "Better than 6 months ago. Still not finished." "So we're both in progress." "That's generally how it works." She turned back to the trail. He fell back into step beside her. Ahead, Lily had apparently found something significant because she'd gone completely still in the way she only went still when something had her full attention, crouched over the pool with her journal pressed to her knee and her pen moving. They reached her in another 30 seconds. She looked up when they arrived. "Sea Star," she said. She pointed into the pool. It was small, 5 inches across, maybe, orange-red against the dark rock, moving with the particular unhurried deliberateness of a creature that operated on a different time scale than anything around it. Fully intact. 5 arms, symmetrical, going about its business in the cold, shallow water. Victoria crouched beside Lily. She looked at the Sea Star for a long moment with genuine attention. Not the performance of interest that adults sometimes deployed with children, the exaggerated enthusiasm that was really just a reflection of the child's excitement. She was actually looking at it. "It's smaller than I expected," she said. "They can get much bigger," Lily said. "This one's probably young." "How can you tell?" "The arm span and the texture. The older ones have more pronounced ossicles. Those are the bumpy parts." Lily pointed. "See how these are relatively smooth?" "I see that." Victoria tilted her head. "You said some of them can grow a whole new body from one arm. If it has enough of the central disc. The central disc is where the vital organs are. If you have that, you can rebuild everything else." Lily wrote something in her journal. "Without the central disc, you can only repair what's already there." Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said very evenly, "That's a useful thing to know." Lily looked up and gave her the look, the patient, clear-eyed appraisal that she'd inherited from Claire, the one that didn't ask for more than what was true. "I thought you'd think so," she said. Ethan stood behind them and watched the two of them crouched over a tide pool in November, a 30-year-old CEO and an 8-year-old who planned things without announcing it, and felt the particular complex weight of a moment that had too many things in it to name any single one. Well, the weeks that followed moved differently than the weeks before them, not easier. Things didn't become easier so much as they became more honest, which was its own kind of difficulty, but a worthwhile one. There were still complications. There were still board calls and legal reviews, and the ongoing low-level vigilance required of running security for a major corporation. There was still Holt, quiet but not gone, watching from the distance that men like him maintained when a frontal approach had failed. There was still Ethan navigating the particular professional complexity of being in a relationship with the CEO, whose security he managed, a conversation he had with HR in a direct documented meeting that he'd initiated himself because his job was to reduce risk. And this was a risk that needed a clear procedural record. The HR meeting had been uncomfortable in the specific way that honest conversations about personal lives in professional settings were always uncomfortable, not hostile, just awkward, the bureaucratic machinery of an institution trying to accommodate something human-shaped. He and Victoria had both been present. She had handled it with the directness she brought to everything. He had handled it with the factual clarity he brought to everything. The outcome was a formal disclosure, a revised reporting structure that put his direct HR line through the board's independent committee rather than through Victoria's office, and a documentation trail that made the situation transparent in every direction. It wasn't romantic. It was also necessary. And they were both people who understood that necessary things had to be done without waiting to feel good about them. "That was about as pleasant as a root canal," Victoria said after, in the elevator going down. "It went fine." "It was fine. Fine and pleasant are different things." She looked at him sideways. "You were very composed." "It's my job to be composed." "It's also slightly inhuman in certain contexts." "You want me to have been more visibly uncomfortable?" "I want—" She stopped. "No. I don't know what I want from that meeting. I just want it to be over." "It's over," she exhaled. "Good." He reached over and pressed the lobby button a second time, which didn't do anything but was the kind of action people performed when they needed to feel like they were moving towards something. She noticed him do it and didn't comment, which was its own form of grace. Sandra met Victoria for the first time on a Tuesday evening in November, when Ethan had a delayed flight back from a site security assessment in Detroit, and Sandra had Lily and Victoria had stopped by the apartment to drop off a file that could have been emailed, but that she had, apparently, decided to deliver in person. Lily let her in. This was the version of events Ethan received from 3 different sources with 3 different emphases. From Lily, who reported it as entirely normal. From Sandra, who reported it with the particular dry amusement of an older sibling watching a younger one navigate something significant. And from Victoria, who reported it with the studied composure of someone who had been unexpectedly ambushed by a family situation and had survived it with dignity. What had happened, assembled from all 3 accounts, was this. Victoria had arrived at the door, Lily had answered it, and Sandra had come out of the kitchen and stood in the hallway with a dish towel and the specific expression of a woman who intended to form an accurate opinion and was prepared to take as long as necessary. They had apparently had a 40-minute conversation that Ethan was not present for and would never fully know the contents of, because both Sandra and Victoria, in their very different ways, were people who kept their own counsel. What he did know was that when he came home at 9:30, Sandra met him at the door, took his bag, and said in a low voice, "She's good people. I mean it." Then she went back to the kitchen. Victoria was at the kitchen table helping Lily with a science worksheet. Not performing helping, actually doing it, working through a question about electrical conductivity with the focused patience of someone who found the problem genuinely interesting. Lily was explaining her reasoning with the particular energy she got when a person engaged with her as an intellectual equal, which was something children knew how to recognize even when adults forgot to offer it. Ethan stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before either of them noticed him. This was, he thought, the thing that people didn't tell you about grief. Not the acute part, not the first year, but the long part. The part where you started to find your way back to something whole, and the wholeness felt unfamiliar because the shape of it was different from the shape you'd been before. Claire had been the warm center of their household, the person who made it feel inhabited rather than just occupied. And after she was gone, the apartment had stayed physically the same, but the quality of the air had changed in a way Ethan had never found a word for. He was looking at it now, and the quality of the air was different again. Not the same as before. It would never be the same as before. And he had stopped wanting it to be, because wanting things to be the same was a way of refusing what was actually in front of you. But different in a way that felt, for the first time in 4 years, like addition rather than subtraction. Lily looked up and saw him. "Dad, we're doing conductivity. Victoria knows about circuits." "I took a semester of electrical engineering," Victoria said without looking up from the worksheet. "I was terrible at it, but I retained the fundamentals." She finished writing something, handed Lily the pencil. "Your logic is right. You just set up the equation backward." "That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure." Lily erased and rewrote. "Dad, are you just going to stand there?" "For a minute," he said. Victoria looked up then. She met his eyes across the kitchen, just for a second, a look that had no performance in it, that was simply the look of one person acknowledging another person in a shared space. He came into the kitchen. December moved fast, the way December always did. The city putting up its lights, the lake going iron gray, the particular compression of the year's end that made weeks feel like days. Ethan's team ran 2 external security reviews, updated the building's access protocol for the new year, and conducted the quarterly threat assessment that resulted in 1 significant adjustment to the executive travel policy and several minor ones. Victoria closed the Meridian acquisition in the 3rd week of December, which she had been working toward for 7 months. The deal was complex, and the close was the result of weeks of negotiation and documentation and the particular exhaustion of high-stakes legal work that she processed, as she processed most things, by going very quiet for several days, and then emerging on the other side of it with the calm of someone who had made peace with an outcome before it was finalized. She called him the night the deal closed, at 11 p.m., from her office. "It's done," she said. "Congratulations." "Thank you." A pause. "I'm sitting in my office and I just realized I don't know what to do with myself when a thing I've been working toward for 7 months is suddenly finished." "Go home." "I know, I'm going." She didn't move immediately because she was still on the phone. "I keep thinking about what it felt like to work on this deal in September versus what it feels like to close it now. It's the same deal. But I'm different now than I was in September." He thought about September. About a gala and a conversation in a service corridor and an 8-year-old who explained tide pools in the dark. "Yeah," he said. "You are. Is that good? What do you think?" She was quiet for a moment. "I think I used to know exactly what I wanted and how to get it. And now I know what I want, but the how to get it part involves variables that don't behave like business variables. And it's..." She paused. "It's harder and better simultaneously. That's generally what people mean when they say something matters." "I know." Another pause. "Ethan?" "Yeah." "I'm glad you said what you said at the gala." He thought about a midnight blue dress and a quiet comment that had come out because the truth of the moment required it. "I'm glad you knew I didn't mean the dress." "I always knew." Her voice was quiet. "From the first time you looked at me like that, I knew. I just didn't know what to do with it." And now? Now I'm going home, she said. And tomorrow I want to do something normal. Nothing work-related. Something normal. Like what? I don't know, something Lily would approve of. He thought for a second. She's been talking about the Museum of Science and Industry for 3 weeks. Something about the submarine exhibit. A submarine. She has a theory about pressure differentials and structural engineering that she wants to test against the actual model. A pause. Then, tell her Saturday. She'll be up for the next 4 hours planning it. Then tell her in the morning. He smiled at the wall of his apartment. Get some sleep. You too. A beat. Good night, Ethan. Good night. The second gala came in late January, the company's annual investor appreciation event, a different venue than the charity gala. But the same essential geography. 300 people in expensive clothes performing connection while wanting things from each other. Ethan had been running security for these events for 2 years. He knew the choreography. He knew where to stand, how to move, what the evening's specific threats and annoyances were likely to be. It was familiar in the way that his job was generally familiar, demanding and variable but operating within a known architecture. What was different this January was everything else. He was standing near the east entrance when the car arrived. He was not thinking about what she was wearing. He was reviewing the evening's access list and thinking about a catering credentialing issue that had come up at 3 p.m. and been resolved by 4, but that he wanted to confirm directly with his team. He was absolutely not thinking about what she was wearing. The car door opened. Silver. The gown was silver, not the midnight blue of 8 months ago, but something lighter, more open, the kind of color that worked in January light. She stepped out and assessed the entrance in the 4-second read she always did. And then she looked at him. Holloway? She said. Formal. The professional register, in place for the public context. Ms. Sterling. He fell into step. 280 guests, board members on the north side of the room. Ashford arrived early. He's already working the donors, which is genuinely helpful. Your remarks are at 9. There's no seating controversy this time because I pre-cleared the placement chart with your assistant on Monday. Good. She was scanning the room as they moved. Sims? Not present. His invitation was declined at the board level. Good, she said again. They moved into the ballroom. The room shifted the way it always did when she entered it. That particular change in gravity, the slight adjustment of everyone's awareness. She was already reading it, mapping the evening, identifying the obligations and the opportunities, and the 47 small decisions the next 3 hours would require. Ethan took his position. 3 feet to her left, 2 steps back. He watched the room. An hour into the evening, he was on his second pass of the north quadrant when he heard his earpiece. Holloway, you've got a visitor at the exterior west entrance. Says he has a meeting with Ms. Sterling. Not on the schedule, hold him. He moved to the west entrance. The man standing outside was 60 years old, silver-haired, wearing a coat that cost more than Ethan's first car. He had the particular stillness of someone accustomed to waiting because they were accustomed to people coming to them, which meant waiting was a temporary condition rather than a habitual one. Richard Holt. Ethan stood in the entrance and looked at him through the glass for a moment. Then he pushed the door open. Mr. Holt. Mr. Holloway. Holt's voice was even, cultivated, the voice of a man who had spent 60 years deciding how he wanted to sound. I'd like a few minutes with Ms. Sterling. She's not available. I think she might make an exception. She won't. Ethan held the door. The January air was sharp. I can take a message. Holt looked at him. The assessment was frank and unhurried, the look of a man deciding how much of an obstacle this was. You're very good at your job. Thank you. That wasn't entirely a compliment. I know. Ethan held his gaze. Mr. Holt, you made a move 6 weeks ago that didn't work. The structural reasons it didn't work are still in place. If you have a legitimate business interest in Sterling Technologies, you have Victoria's legal team's contact information. If you have something else in mind, I'd encourage you to reconsider it. A pause. Holt's expression didn't change in any visible way, but something in his posture shifted. The micro-adjustment of a man recalculating. She built something real, he said finally. It came out with a quality that was almost, but not quite, reluctant. Yes, Ethan said. She did. Holt looked at him for another moment. Then he turned and walked back to his car. Ethan watched the car pull away. He let the door close. He stood for a second in the entrance vestibule and thought about what Holt had said. The admission wrapped in the almost compliment, the specific surprise of a man who had underestimated something and discovered too late that the underestimation was the mistake. Then he went back to work. He found Victoria near the auction display at 9:45, post remarks, doing the careful social mathematics of the event's final hour. She saw him coming and read something in his face. She was very good at reading his face now, which was both something he'd had to consciously adjust to and something he didn't want to change. "What happened?" she asked quietly, keeping her expression event-appropriate. "Holt at the west entrance. Wanted a meeting. I declined on your behalf." Her expression didn't shift. "And?" "He left, peacefully." A pause. "He said you built something real." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Huh. Yeah. That's either the beginning of a concession or the beginning of a different kind of play." "I think it might actually be the beginning of a concession," Ethan said, "but I'll keep watching." "You always do." She glanced at him sideways. The room was moving around them, champagne and conversation and the orchestrated social performance of a corporate evening. And in the middle of it, Victoria Sterling was looking at him with that look, the third one, the unguarded one. "How do I look?" she asked. He felt the 8 months between this question and the last time she'd asked it. He felt all of it, the gala and the conference room and the tide pools and the kitchen table and the board meeting corridor. He felt the specific weight of everything that had accumulated between one question and the next. "Beautiful," he said. She stepped slightly closer. "Still not talking about the dress, are you?" "Not even a little," she laughed. A real one, the short, surprised laugh that transformed her face entirely, the one he'd been cataloging since October without ever finding the right word for it. The word, he thought now, was simply hers. It belonged to her specifically, to no category, to no professional register, to nothing he could document or assess or prepare for. He didn't try to find a better word. He just held it. Around them, the room continued its careful performance, entirely unaware of the two people standing in its middle who had stopped performing anything at all. Tiem. 3 months later, on a Saturday afternoon in April, Ethan was sitting on a bench at the lakefront watching his daughter teach a 30-year-old CEO how to identify sea star species from a field guide. And he was thinking about the thing nobody tells you about the life you didn't plan. The life you plan has a shape you can describe in advance. It has logic and sequence, and the particular comfort of moving towards something you chose. The life you didn't plan has a different shape, rougher, more accidental, assembled from things that happened to you rather than things you decided. It has the shape of a midnight blue dress and a 4-second moment and an 8-year-old who texted a billionaire about tide pools. He thought about what he'd learned in the year that this story had covered, about the specific gap between strength and invulnerability. Victoria had been invulnerable for 6 years before he'd watched her press her thumb against her finger under a board table and understood that she wasn't. He had been invulnerable for 4 years before his daughter had looked at him over a bowl of cereal and told him his eyes looked the way they did when he'd been staring at a screen too long. The thing about invulnerability is that it isn't strength. It's the performance of strength for an audience that includes yourself. Real strength, the kind that held up under board meetings and press scandals and late-night phone calls and the long, ordinary difficulty of being a person responsible for other people. Real strength wasn't the absence of vulnerability. It was the willingness to be seen accurately and to stay anyway. Victoria had seen him accurately from the beginning, he thought, had understood something about him right from the beginning that she'd acted on before he'd fully articulated it to himself. And he had seen her, had been paying close, careful, professional attention to who she actually was for 2 years before the gala night gave that attention a name. They were both, in their different ways, people who had learned to need very little from others because the cost of needing things was too unpredictable. The math of that was protective, and it was also, over time, its own kind of damage. What the year had required of both of them, the thing that the scandal and the documentation and the board meetings had been, in some oblique way, demanding, was the decision to need things anyway, to let the cost be unpredictable, to stay present in a situation where staying present meant you could get hurt. His daughter had understood this at 8 years old with the clear, uncomplicated vision of someone who hadn't yet learned to be strategic about love. Sea stars grow back what they lose. The mechanism is in the having enough of the central disk, the vital core, the irreducible self. If you have that, you can rebuild everything else. He watched Lily point something out in the field guide and Victoria lean over to look, their two heads bent together over the page, and he thought, this is the central disk. This particular afternoon, this bench, this cold April light, this is what you rebuild from. Dad! Lily looked up. Come look at this one. It's the regenerating kind. He stood up from the bench. He walked across the rocky shore to where his daughter and the woman he loved were crouched over a tide pool, and he crouched down beside them, and he looked. The sea star was larger than the November one, orange and firm and moving with that unhurried ancient patience, entirely indifferent to the three humans watching it. One of its arms was slightly shorter than the others, the new growth still catching up, the evidence of something lost and being reclaimed. Look at the arm, Lily said, pointing. You can see where it's regrowing. Victoria looked for a long moment. Then she reached over without looking and found Ethan's hand and held it. She didn't say anything. He didn't either. The lake moved behind them. The city stood to the south in the clear April air. The sea star moved through the water with the patience of something that had always known that loss was not the end of the story. That the end of the story was what you grew back, and how, and who you grew it with. Lily wrote something in her observation journal, turned a page, wrote something else. For the record, she said without looking up, I called this from the beginning. You called what exactly? Victoria asked. Lily looked up with the clear, patient expression of someone stating an obvious fact. All of it, she said. The whole thing. Victoria looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at his daughter. She did, he said. She really did. Lily closed her journal with the satisfaction of a scientist whose hypothesis had been confirmed by the data, and stood up and brushed the cold sand from her knees and started walking up the shore to look for the next pool. They watched her go. Then they stood up and followed her. The three of them walked north along the waterline in the April light, and the story that none of them had planned kept moving forward the only way any real story did, one ordinary, irreplaceable step at a time.